We have, again, the Key Biscayne Community Foundation, the Citizen Science Program, and Rumya, the director of that program, the best speaker they have, will be here talking about our wonderful distressed planet.
Before I begin, on the bright side, I'm not going to talk about how distressed the planet is. We will have enough of that for a little while. Today, I am going to talk to you about how alien our planet is. Yesterday was Earth Day, in case anybody didn't know that, so happy Earth Day to everybody. Really, every day is Earth Day, but yesterday was the official one. So I figured, in honor of Earth Day, Earth Week, and Earth Month, I would talk about how unearthly Earth is. And I did put part one on this because, again, like with the animals, as I was making my list, I had far more than I could include. So we could do a part two on this if you guys enjoy it. So first, are there any places on Earth that we know of that life cannot exist? No. Yeah, so, as far as life as we know it, and that includes, bacteria, microorganisms, things like that, there is not really anywhere that we can say definitively that life can't exist there. There's a lot of places that come close because they're so extreme, but more often than not, the more we study an area that's really strange, the more we find that, there are microorganisms here, or sometimes even things like insects, larger creatures. So we do find that life thrives in all sorts of different environments, really extreme environments and really, to us, normal environments. It's funny, we talk about it that way because we tend to talk about everything from our point of view. If you were to take one of these like insects out of a cave where it's evolved for millions of years and bring it out here, it'll think this is the extreme environment. But then when you look at, Earth and what it does, and the environments that it creates, the weather patterns, caves, the oceans, the deep oceans especially, there's a lot of strange things going on. So we're going to talk about some of those today. No particular order, so I just put them alphabetically because there's no really good way to group these. Blood Falls in Antarctica. Oh, and I'm doing this a little bit different. I'm going to have the text come up first and talk about it before I show you the pictures, because for most of these, the pictures are what are really, really interesting. First of all, Blood Falls in Antarctica does not mean that Antarctica is bleeding to death. What it is a subterranean glacier. It's a subglacial reservoir. It's a lake that exists underneath the glaciers in Antarctica, and it's very heavily iron rich. So when that water comes out from underneath this glacier, it hits the air and it oxidizes, and the iron essentially rusts. So you end up with very rusty water that is very, very red. The water itself, this is Antarctica. Water freezes in Antarctica. This water does not freeze because it's extremely salty. I put 2 to 3 times saltier than seawater. I saw another statistic that said 4 to 5 times saltier than seawater. Whatever it is, it's super salty and it won't freeze because of that. They have also found, despite how super salty it is and full of iron, it does have microbial life, not so much in the waterfall, but in the actual reservoir. And that reservoir, being underneath a glacier, doesn't get any light. So this is life that is existing there without any sunlight. Before I put these pictures up, I just want to point out, if you Google Blood Falls, you will get a ton of pictures that look completely insane, like super huge falls that are very, very red. Those are fake. This is what it looks like on a very red day. More often than not, it looks kind of brown. But this was a day that it was looking very rusty. So it does kind of look like Antarctica is bleeding a bit. It has a big gash. But it is very interesting, and that just flows down into the ocean from the waterfall. And that is actually a lot taller than it looks. Antarctica is huge, so these are taken from a little bit far away. I don't remember how tall. So next, Cave of Crystals. This is one of my favorite places that I learned about, and I think I learned about it back in like high school maybe, or middle school. And it was back when it was still like a fairly new discovery, and just super, super interesting. It's also called the Giant Crystal Cave, which is a very apropos name because it has giant crystals. It, in fact, has the largest crystals that we have ever found anywhere on Earth. It is in Mexico near the Nika mountain. And these crystals have formed over thousands and thousands of years. And they've done that by existing, these minerals existed underwater. The cave was flooded. And they existed underwater in a very, very stable environment that didn't change. And the temperature stayed very warm and also stable. And that's because the Nika mountain is a dormant volcano. Dormant does not mean dead. It still has a magma chamber, which is right underneath this cave and heats the cave. That's why it stays at a very steady temperature of 139 degrees Fahrenheit. The cave itself, once it was discovered due to mining and groundwater pumping. So they were mining the area for various minerals, whatever they were looking for, and they were pumping out a lot of groundwater, and the mining operations were doing that. And what happened is it drained all the water out of the cave. And when they discovered it, they immediately, very quickly realized that, oh, you can't really go into this cave without, immediately baking. But they were able to explore it for a little while. And, you can't really go in there without protective suits and everything. Aside from the heat, which on its own will kill you, you can't breathe in there because the humidity is always at nearly 100%. And the problem with that is when you exhale right now on a regular day in a regular situation, you exhale water vapor as part of your breath. There's carbon dioxide, there's oxygen, there's water vapor, whatever. And that water vapor just, evaporates into the air. You also can breathe in water vapor, but it's a balance. The problem here is that because the humidity is so high, you can't exhale the water vapor because it can't evaporate. The air is already thick with water vapor. So your water vapor can't leave your lungs. But when you breathe in, you're breathing in water vapor. And what ends up happening, if you don't bake to death, you'll drown just standing there because your lungs will fill with the water that you're taking in with each breath. Hence why you can't go in there without protective gear. And even with protective gear, you can't stay in for very long. There have been microorganisms discovered inside the crystals themselves. And they have probably been trapped in these crystals for thousands of years because the crystals themselves are thousands of years old. So it's a really, really interesting situation. There has been one reported death. He was a miner that found out about the cave while it was still open, and he wanted to take some crystals. It was closed off to the public, but obviously he got past whatever security they had, if there was any, and unfortunately he died because he didn't realize how deadly it was to go in there. They have since closed it off, and it has actually refilled with water on its own. So those little orange guys there, those are people, regular, full-grown men. So they're gypsum crystals, which is similar to quartz, but as you can see, they're absolutely ginormous. And then here, it's a little hard to see, but there's a little shadow of a guy right there. So you can see how tall these crystals are. And the entire cave is full of crystals just like this, and it's a fairly large cave system.
Is it all like that architectural, the scaffolding everywhere?
Pretty much, yeah. It all very much looks like that, just crystal skyscrapers or crystal forest or whatever, however you want to look at it. It's just really, really, really interesting.
How big is it?
Sorry?
How big is this cave?
I don't know. We don't know for sure because they only kind of explored a small portion of it. There's a lot of areas they can't get into. There's connections where the connection is too small. So we have no idea how large the cave system actually is. But it is obviously quite tall, at least this portion of it, and fairly large. The Danakil Depression in Ethiopia. This is one of the consistently hottest places on Earth that is consistently inhabited. Now, obviously, South Florida is very hot. It gets really hot here in the summertime. It gets hotter than 95 degrees sometimes. The thing is, in the winter, sometimes, as you know, it can get down to 60, 50, depending on what's going on. This area stays consistently in the 90s all year round. Very hot area. It sits below sea level, and it is actually still sinking. And that is because of the hydrothermal vents that are underneath it. that are constantly bubbling up with more minerals and things like that. It's, to me, I'm not a geologist, so I don't actually know what I'm talking about, but it sounds like if an area is sinking and sinking and it has hydrothermal vents, that means there's a magma chamber below it. And I feel like that means that there's a volcano that wants to erupt soon if it's sinking. But I don't know if that's true. That's just what I think. It is full of crazy colors. It's all due to various minerals and things that come out with the hydrothermal vents. So you have like sulfur and iron and magnesium and other types of elements. But they create these really, really cool colors. You have neon yellows and greens and oranges. There are active lava lakes, which means, volcano. And as far as I'm concerned, it seems like it's a stray piece of Venus that broke off and landed on Earth, because this is literally how they describe Venus. It is volcanically very, very active. The air is toxic. There's crazy stuff everywhere. And this is how I picture Venus looking. So, yeah, and it has these interesting kind of steps that form because of the hydrothermal vents, and you have minerals that build up that create all of these steps. But, those lower areas here, that's where it's continuing to sink. The Darvaza gas crater. This one I think is like really, it's kind of funny how it started, at least to me, but it's definitely a very strange phenomenon. So it's also known as the door to hell. It was discovered accidentally by Soviet geologists who were digging in the area, and they hit a natural gas chamber. Now, that's something that happens when you're digging deep in the ground. That's not an uncommon thing. But rather than letting it gas out, because natural gas is actually poisonous, they set it on fire thinking that it's probably a small chamber, the gas will come out, burn up as it comes out, and then after a little while it'll be empty and we can continue digging. And that's not what happened. They set it on fire in 1971 and it's never stopped.
They found natural gas.
Yeah, so they found not just natural gas, seemingly unending natural gas, but they're burning it, so it's not helping anybody. It is about 70 meters wide, and depending on where you are, about 20 to 30 meters deep. And that's probably wider than when it started. I would imagine that the fires are constantly affecting it. And it is fed by a constant supply of methane gas, which comes from somewhere. Who knows? There's a lot of different ways that natural gas is formed and natural gas pockets are found underground. But they don't know why this one hasn't burned out in, almost 60 years. Technically, this isn't unlike all the other ones, which are natural that I'm talking about. This one is technically human-made, but it is a really interesting phenomenon. It's a human-made hole in the ground that they set on fire, but it is caused, like the continuation of the burning is caused by a natural phenomenon, which is the natural gas. Yes.
Two questions. Have they tried to put the fire out? And if not, or if they couldn't, have they tried to use the methane in some way?
As far as I know, they haven't tried to use it. They probably can put it out, but they haven't tried. There have been talks recently about putting it out because they're concerned that its constant burning is actually a problem, but they haven't done it yet. But they have been talking about possibly doing that. So the fact that they're talking about it makes me think that they probably know how to do it. Keep in mind that that picture's at night, so it's much brighter than it would be normally, but there is a little dude standing right there. So you can see how large it is. Kind of looks like he's standing on the edge of a volcano. This is what it looks like more so during the day. So it's not like the entire thing is burning, but you can see why it looks like a portal to hell, because it's literally like, oh, look, the edges are burning, and if you go down in the middle, then, so here is a aerial view of what it looks like. Sorry, the video is a little bit jumpy. This is drone footage that somebody took. So very large. They have a very easily climbable fence around the edge, and I can completely imagine somebody being like, I'm going to stand on the edge and take a selfie. You always have those people. So next we have Devil's Kettle, and that is in Minnesota in the US. I made it a point to include some things from the US this time. It is the Brule River that goes through Minnesota, and specifically a waterfall where the waterfall, as it falls down, is split into two halves. The left-hand side, if you're standing in the waterfall and looking out to where it falls, the left-hand side falls down normally, looks just like a regular waterfall. The right-hand side, which is pushed this way by the split because of the big rocks in the way, goes down into a hole. For the longest time, we had no idea where that hole went. They've tried all kinds of different things, throwing ping pong balls out down there to see if they pop up somewhere else. They've thrown GPS trackers down there, and none of these things ever come back. And so they're just like, where does this water go? We have no idea for quite a while. I believe it was 2017 is when they finally kind of figured it out. But it was definitely a very strange and interesting mystery. So you can see right here, that's the one side of the waterfall, and that one is the side going into the hole. And here's a closer look at it. And it just goes in there and vanishes. What they discovered is actually very boring and anticlimactic. It comes back when they measure the river downstream. It has the same water volume as it does before it falls over the waterfall. So basically it goes down somewhere and percolates back up through the groundwater and rejoins the river, which is super boring. I prefer to know, like, you know, it just vanishes into the earth somewhere. Also, that means that there is a huge collection of like ping pong balls and garbage down in that hole somewhere. The Jacuzzi of Despair. I can't say that name without giggling because it sounds hilarious. Because also, who despairs in a jacuzzi? So it is located in the Gulf of Mexico. It is an underwater lake. And the way that's possible is that the lake that's on the ocean floor, or the Gulf of Mexico floor, is made of super, super salty brine water. And it's way more salty than the surrounding seawater, and therefore that doesn't actually mix. And so it's denser because it's very, very thick brine, and it sits in one place. And you'll see like a little bit of kind of mist when I show you the pictures and video. But for the most part, it just sits on the bottom and it doesn't mix. It is so briny and so salty that it is, as far as we can tell, pretty lethal to most marine organisms. But they do think there are a few different species of little shrimp that live in there, and a lot of microorganisms. Again, these extremophile bacteria and microorganisms you can often find in these like really weird places. But the interesting part is that there are a lot of animals that kind of depend on this like very salty brine for food in different ways. Like they feed on the microorganisms and things like that, but they can't go into the brine to get them. So they live right on the edge. And it is essentially them living on the edge between life and death. So that's an aerial view of it through the water in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what it looks like on the bottom. And it's not that huge. I mean, that's a 10-meter mark there. So it's maybe like, I don't know, 25 meters across. And this is one of those crabs that lives right around it, these bivalves, these little oysters or whatever they are. They're probably, they're filtering the water. They're eating a lot of these microorganisms that live in that really salty area. But if this guy who moves around isn't careful and falls in and can't get out, they die. It is extremely toxic because it's so salty. So if they go into that water and don't get out very quickly, it is toxic to them. Yes?
Do those creatures have salt detection organs, or?
I imagine they may not need them, seeing as how they live in salt water, so they're not likely to encounter anything that is not salt water. So I'm not sure. I couldn't say that whether or not they do, and if they do, whether or not it knows when it's too salty, because it doesn't seem to stop them from going in there. You see the same thing actually with the Dead Sea. If you look at pictures, there's a lot of pictures that show animals that have like landed in the Dead Sea and died because it's so salty. And the Dead Sea, as you know, is like not underwater. It's an above water lake, and birds and stuff will land in it and it's too salty for them. So I think it's very much like that. Like they just don't realize that it's a deadly situation just by looking at it. They can't tell. That would be my guess. So next we have Lonar Lake in India. This lake it's not super crazy like some of these other ones, but it does do some interesting things. First of all, it was created by a meteorite impact about, 50,000 years ago. And what's important and interesting about that is that it's a meteor impact into volcanic basalt, as opposed to all the other types of stone and rocks and things, limestone, whatever, that we have. Why that's important, it's only one of 4 meteorite impacts into volcanic basalt that we know about. And the reason that's interesting and important is that we're pretty certain that that is how the very, very early development of Earth and how life evolved was from this type of meteor impact. And so this kind of gives us a window into how life may have started evolving on Earth. So studying these types of impacts is really important and it's very interesting. And it's one of the reasons that they call it a living laboratory, because you have this weird, these weird forms of life that theoretically are similar to how life started on Earth, and you can kind of watch their development and see, how they started, how they develop. It is both alkaline, which means it's very basic, and it's saline. So it is another saline lake. I didn't realize when I put this together that almost every single environment I'm talking about is very salty, but apparently that's where all the weird stuff is. When you look at salty, again, it's very, very salty. I'm not sure how much more salty than seawater in this case, because it's not actually near the coast. But the middle of the lake, the deepest part, is the saltiest part. The edges actually get freshwater inflow from the groundwater. And so it tends to be, less salty around the edges and also less alkaline. But when you think about it, so regular water with nothing in it is pH 7, that is neutral. If it gets lower than that, then it's acidic. If it gets higher than that, then that's alkaline. The ocean water is about 8.1. So it's a little bit more on the alkaline side. The deep water in Lonar Lake gets to 11.2, which is crazy, crazy basic, alkaline. That's very, very high. And so a lot of things can't live in that. But once again, there are a lot of extremophile microorganisms and bacteria that live in this lake. And here's the interesting thing about it. This is what it looks like normally. A little bit green, doesn't look that interesting. But when the freshwater inflow changes and becomes a little bit saltier, and there is a heavier presence of saline in the water, there's a specific type of bacteria that blooms, like when we have algae blooms, it does the same thing in this lake. And when it blooms, it turns pink. And it turns very pink. There's only been a few times that we know of that this has happened. Once right after, or during COVID, and they think it had something to do with the decrease in human activity, and that changed the groundwater flow and what was going into the lake, and it turned very, very pink. And that's only happened a couple other times that we know of, but it is a very strange ecosystem. Mobile cave in Romania. This one is one of my favorite ones because this is the kind of thing where I feel like can prove that aliens might exist somewhere. It was sealed off from the outside world for about 5.5 million years, completely devoid of sunlight. The bottom part is flooded, the top part that's above the water is just completely underground. There was nothing connecting it to the surface, so no sunlight, no mixture of air to the outside, completely sealed off. And so it has created its own unique ecosystem that is entirely devoid of sunlight. It runs on toxic gases in our air. There's quite a lot of nitrogen. It's completely neutral. But obviously we depend on oxygen. The trees and plants depend on carbon dioxide. To us, those are normal. Those are not lethal. To these guys, that might be lethal, at least that level. The bacteria, microorganisms that live in this cave take the place of plants. They're the ones that take in all of these toxic gases and create the air that is breathable for the insects and things that live in this cave. But those insects have also evolved to live among these toxic gases. There's not enough oxygen in there for us, and then the other gases that are present are far too toxic for people. So if scientists, anybody goes in there, they have to wear, protective gear. There are at least 50 or more species of insects, and I think there might even be fish, I'm not sure, in the water, that live in this cave. pretty much all of them are blind because there's no light. They have no need for eyes. Over 5.5 million years, they have, evolved to not have eyes anymore because what's the point? I'm pretty certain that this cave is an alien experiment laboratory that somebody came here and set up. But this is, once it was open to the outside, and they keep it, I think, closed most of the time, but it is open for scientific study. This is what it looks like when you first enter, I think. And so, there's like this watery area, and this is also an entrance to a cave. The cave goes down into that water and like around. So there's a whole section of it that's underwater, and then there's a part that's above water. These are some of the insects that live in there. They're all blind. None of them have, that one has eyes, but clearly they don't work. And yeah, spider with no eyes, some kind of scorpion or something. And I don't know what that is, but it's disgusting. And this is one of the small areas where, as they're exploring the cave, they have to crawl through and get to these various places. This is way too claustrophobic for me. This is why I could never be a cave explorer, as interesting as it is and how weird caves are. That would give me a panic attack. And that's not even a bad one. I've seen ones where they literally have to take all their gear off and crawl through a hole and then pull their gear through. Oldonyo Lengai in Tanzania. This, again, completely unique compared to other places in the world. It is the only volcano that we know of that produces carbonatite lava. And that just means, so most of the volcanoes that you see that produce the bright orange or red lava, that is silica-based lava. And that's very normal, that as far as like volcanoes are concerned, that's what we're used to seeing in those active volcanoes. This is most like at least 50% carbon-based lava. And what that does is that instead of creating the bright, glowing orange lava that we're used to, it makes black lava. The orange lava is usually around, I think, 11 to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Very, very hot, obviously. You can't go near it. Not that you can really go near this, but it's half as much. It's 500 to 600 degrees, which is quite a huge difference. For any kind of volcano, that is an enormous difference. But because of the different type of lava, it also has a very different effect on the ecosystem. It creates very fast changing environments. As the lava comes out and hits the air, it turns a kind of silvery or chalky color. And that's because of the carbon content creates that sort of situation. The silica lava that we're used to seeing, when it comes out and cools down, it hardens. And that's literally how islands are built. That's how the Hawaiian Islands came into being, because those volcanoes literally built those islands by bringing up lava, letting it come out and cool, and it just builds up the islands over time. This doesn't really do that because it comes out, it becomes chalky and ashy, and it breaks apart very easily. And so I'm not really sure it builds anything, but it does create a very fast changing environment. It also sits on the East African Rift, which is a super cool area if you look into it. It's a very active continental divide, tectonic plate divide. And it basically means that, as you know, the tectonic plates are either kind of pushing together or moving apart. And in this case, it is two tectonic plates that are moving apart, but they are on land. Most of them are in the water. This one is on land, and it's literally pulling a chunk of Africa off of the main continent very slowly. I mean, the tectonic plates move like a centimeter a year or something, but that is where this one sits. So that is what the caldera looks like. And that is all ashy, the black lava that has turned ashy. And it literally looks like it is a volcano that has silver lava. It's very, very, very strange. The Rainbow Mountains. If you saw my flyer, this was on the flyer because it's really, really interesting and cool. The Rainbow Mountains in China, the colors are actually from various layers of sandstone that have accumulated over centuries, basically, in various layers, various colors. The colors are not due to plants. A lot of times when you see aerial photos of places and they're all colorful, it's because of like plants or whatever is growing there, moss, things like that. In this case, it's not any of that. There's none or very little vegetation. It's all chemistry, essentially. And basically what you have is the minerals as they're exposed by erosion. The hills are shaped by, tectonic movements and erosion, things like that. As the various layers get exposed, they, again, are exposed to air and they rust. And so it creates these like reds and pinks and yellows. When it gets rained on, the colors become much more vivid, which is unfortunate in some way because, you want to go to a beautiful place and take a picture when there's like a beautiful clear sky and it's really nice. But then if you go when it's raining, you actually get better colors. It is part of a larger formation that goes kind of throughout China, but this is the best example of it. And I only put in one picture because it really only needs one picture. It doesn't look real, but that's what it looks like. And again, when it rains, the colors are much more vivid. Also, I love that they put in a road and made it pink, like it had to match. The sailing stones in Death Valley. This is one that I found super interesting when I first learned about it too. It is in the racetrack playa. I don't know if it got that name because of the stones or because if it already had that. But basically what they found is that you have these stones and they can vary in size from like very small, couple ounces, to over 700 pounds. And what they were seeing is that they appeared to be moving across the dry lake bed. It's dry and cracked, there's nothing there. And you have this giant stone that's here and this long trail in the lake bed behind it. But no footprints, nothing else. So it's like, how did that happen? And every time, they would like mark them to see where they are and come back later and look at them and they've moved 5 meters. And, but again, there's nothing showing that anything pushed it or that there was water running through the area that may have lifted it or anything like that. And, if you think about it, water's not necessarily going to pick up a 700-pound stone. So it was very confusing for a long, long time. They did actually figure it out finally in 2014. They've been looking at it for a very long time. And they finally did manage to observe the rocks moving. They put GPS trackers on them and started watching them. And basically what they found happens is that the conditions have to be just right. But during certain times of the year, it gets cold enough that despite the fact that it is Death Valley, there's no water, it's a dried lake bed, there are minute trace amounts of water vapor. And they will collect, because it's colder, so they won't be suspended anymore. They'll collect on the ground or on the rocks. And if it gets cold enough, they'll form a very, very thin layer of ice. And then there just has to be a light breeze, and they'll move just a little bit. And it's, they kept saying, everything I was reading about them said that they don't move in a way that's you could perceive, because they move too slowly. But then they would say they might move 5 meters in a minute. And I was like, I feel like I would see that in 1 minute. That's fast. But so I don't know, actually, I don't know if I believe what I read, but they move in a way that is very hard to see it happen. But it's literally just a breeze or a wind and just the right conditions to have a tiny amount of ice. And you have this. Literally, they're just leaving these trails. See, there's the rock right there. And it moved here. This one moved from there to there. This one was like on some kind of quest. He went really far. And here's just a close-up of what they look like. So again, you look around, there's no footprints, there's nothing there showing that like somebody pushed them or something pushed them. They just, go on these little field trips on their own. The Sea of Stars. Now this is actually something that I added just because it's pretty, but you could see something very similar to this here in Florida. So there is light that you would see in the water. Again, created by bioluminescence. That is a very common theme in this whole presentation. The water, it specifically shows up when the water is disturbed. And there are actually places here, I think even off of Crandon, but I know up north, my parents live near Melbourne. There's a place where you can go on a nighttime kayaking trip and see bioluminescent water. It is variable, and we don't really get it quite as bright as some of these other places do, like this one. But it does, it is variable. It changes every night. It kind of just depends on how much of these microorganisms that create the bioluminescence are actually in the water. Again, as I mentioned, it's a type of bioluminescence that is found globally, but the Maldives seems to have a really particular good spot for it. The glow that these microorganisms make when they're disturbed is for survival. So if you run your hand through the water and it lights up, it's because either A, they're trying to scare you away by lighting up very suddenly, or they're trying to attract a bigger predator, basically with the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So those are some waves on the beach in the Maldives. The waves are really the best way to see them. But yeah, they're extremely bright, very, very bright luminescence or bioluminescence, and very pretty to look at. And again, you see them in the waves because the waves are causing a disturbance. So you won't see it so much out in the ocean where it's calmer, unless you go out there with a boat, and then your boat's going to leave a track of blue for a few seconds. The Sundung Cave in Vietnam. This one is really cool. So it is the largest and deepest cave known. There's a little bit of debate about that, but probably it is the largest and deepest cave that we've ever discovered. It can fit the New York skyline in it. That's how tall it is. It is a very, very tall and deep cave. There is a rainforest growing inside of it. And the trees in that rainforest have been there for quite a long time. They're well over 50 feet tall. It is so deep and disconnected from the world that it creates its own weather system inside. The rainforest has its own rain that happens only inside the cave. It was discovered by a local man in 1991, but it wasn't properly actually explored until more recently in 2009. So all the information we have from it is less than 20 years old. It is a very unique, self-contained ecosystem. And it has changed. It's been formed over millions of years, probably water running through the ground and slowly carving out this huge, huge cave. But it is a self-contained ecosystem, and it has what they call skylights now. And that's basically a few areas where the ceiling has caved in. And so you have actual sunlight coming in. So that's where you have now a rainforest growing, because it happened quite a long time ago, long enough to have 50-foot tall trees in a rainforest. And, probably there are different, insects and animals that may have fallen in. It does have, it shares similar animals to what you'd find outside the cave, but a lot of them are specifically adapted to living in the cave. And there are at least 7 species of various animals and insects that are unique to the cave system. You don't find them outside of there. So this is somebody propelling down into it, right into the rainforest. And you can see just based on, he's close to the camera, that's at least several hundred feet down to get to the bottom. There are videos of people that literally go base jumping into the cave because it's so deep. It's like jumping off of a building. Those people are crazy. This is the river. It has its own river, which is part of its ecosystem. This is the river that probably carved out quite a bit of the cave, and it exists only inside of this cave and moves through. It does have its own fish. It has its own insects, like I said, weather. It's very, very self-contained. And then this is one of the skylights that caved in. All of this debris here that caved in quite a long time ago, that all came from that skylight. And now it's down here, and you can see the light has created sort of a new area where there's green moss and grass and things growing. And there's another skylight, obviously, where this guy is propelling down. He's going down through one of the skylights, and in that area, a rainforest is growing. So it really is its own world within the world. Spotted Lake in British Columbia. So this lake, during the winter, more or less looks like a regular lake. However, in the summer, when the water evaporates, it literally becomes polka dot. Each spot is a different pool, and each pool has its own sort of concentrated mineral or various deposits in that pool. So you have like magnesium sulfate, calcium, sodium sulfates, all kinds of different things, but they're very concentrated within these pools. As I mentioned, it's in the summer specifically that you will see this, because in the winter it's also, covered in snow and ice. But in the summer, the water evaporates down, and the pools have edges on them. So you need the water to come down low enough that the edges of each pool are exposed. So then the pools become very self-contained, and there's no mixing going on. Again, this lake is too saline for most types of life. There's probably microorganisms in there, but for the most part, it's studied and enjoyed as a really interesting geological formation. I'm not actually sure. I didn't look into how the different pools were formed, but I imagine it wouldn't surprise me if it was formerly hydrothermal vents that are no longer there, because it doesn't seem to be that hot like some of these other places. So that's what it looks like in the winter. Very unremarkable. Just looks like winter in Canada. That's what it looks like in the summer. Polka dot lake. And, depending on what's going on, what kind of microorganisms there are, what kinds of minerals are present, the colors can vary quite a bit. They can be a deep blue, they can be pink, and they can be all these different shades of brown and green. And finally, Waitomo glowworm caves in New Zealand. These are very, very creepy, but also cool. So you have this kind of starry night look when you enter the caves. They're very dark, and you look around and you just see specks of light all over the ceiling. And it really looks like you're looking up at the night sky. The glow is a chemical form of bioluminescence that is produced by a larva of some type of fly. I didn't look up the type of fly because I didn't care. But it's some type of fly that lives there, has all this larva, and the larva sticks to the ceiling, and these are the glowworms. And they produce this light with a very distinct bluish hue. And the light is actually to attract other insects because they're carnivorous. And they have these little sticky strings that hang down from them, and they're trying to attract a bug to their little sticky trap so that they can eat them. And the hungrier they get, the more they want to eat, the brighter they start to glow, because they're trying to outcompete all their neighbors that are also glowing really bright. It is a very delicate ecosystem. Any changes in humidity, in the temperature, in the airflow, and especially human activity, because it is a touristy site, all of those can affect the fauna that lives within there, especially these glowworms. But that is what it looks like. And it literally looks like the night sky, but a very interestingly blue night sky. And you can see it's a fairly large cave. There's 2 people standing here. But yeah, very, very pretty. But then when you look up close, it looks like this, because there's all these sticky, gross things hanging down that they're trying to use to catch bugs so that they can eat them. But otherwise, it is a really beautiful site. And it is one of my bucket list things that I would like to do. Have you been there? My colleague Andrew's been there too. As soon as I was telling him about this, he was bragging about it. For those of you that know Andrew, you won't be surprised. So that is all I have. So the conclusion basically is that Earth is a very weird and awe-inspiring place. And there are still so many things left to discover, even though we've been here for so long and we've gotten our fingers into literally everything. Apparently not everything. And like I said, I did 15 different places today. I had over 30 when I made my list, so I can do a second one of these if you want. I can also still do another 20 animals, because every time I start looking for things like this, I find weird animals. I'm like, oh, I'll add that to the animal list. That list is just out of control. But yeah, that's all. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for putting this together. It's very interesting, so thank you for the work you put into it.
No problem.
And secondly, when you talked about the crystal caves, and you said that humans extracted the water, but then the water, it fills up with water again by itself?
Yes.
And you know the source of that?
It's just groundwater. So once the cave was sealed off again, they pumped out the water while they were mining because otherwise the water would be flooding their mines. So they were constantly pumping out groundwater, which is what exposed the crystals in the cave. Once they sealed up the mines, the mining stopped, I think, in 2015 or so, something like that. Once they stopped mining, and eventually stopped studying the cave, they sealed it off again, and just through natural groundwater flow, it refilled. Yes.
Have some of the countries and governments taken steps to protect these things like national parks?
Yeah, some of them. Actually, most of these, I believe, are in national parks. A lot of them, because they're so unique and they're so interesting, and a lot of them are very scientifically important. So most of the places that I've talked about today are either in national parks or are very heavily protected. Like I said, the Crystal Caves, nobody was even allowed to go in there even when it was discovered, and now it's been sealed off and nobody can get in. And it is, I don't know if the Nika Mountain area is a national park or not, but it's a place that you can't get into regardless. The Painted Mountains are in a national park. Most of them are national parks because they're just they're also depending on the place and whether like how accessible they are, they become a very important part of their tourism. So they need them to be protected in order to protect the state that they have. So I think that is probably a big driver in making sure that everything is protected. I can't say that's true for everything, but for a lot of them, they are. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys so much.